Can you feel the sensations of this object? Can you maybe give it a name? I'm just my buddy Rocky. And where does Rocky feel like going out in the woods here? Can he guide me somewhere or take me somewhere? This video is on how to try nature therapy. And that little thing I did at the beginning there, this, if we want to be technical, is actually not a rock or a stone. It's petrified wood. Like you can kind of see if you look very closely, it looks like a piece of wood, but it's like, it feels like a rock. It's very heavy. I am not smart enough to know the science behind how that works, but it's kind of neat. And this thing with giving it a name and like feeling the texture of it and maybe even the smell of it and saying like, oh, I want it to guide me or whatever. I know that sounds like goofy and really out there, and in some ways it was, but I'll explain what that's all about. But that was just like a sample of some of the stuff we did when I tried this nature therapy experience. So the background on this, I went to a summit that was all about rewilding, which is kind of like the intersection of meditation and mindfulness and nature. And I got to take part in a class, and in the morning we did like a guided forest therapy session with a guy who literally founded the Association of Nature and Forest Therapy. I'll include the info down below, but his name is Amos Clifford. Really interesting guy, has like a background as a Zen student as well as a psychotherapist. And so I want to share in this video kind of what my experience was like and how you could just try this yourself. And I'll start with some of the why you might consider it. So let's get into it. So there is some pretty interesting research starting to emerge on forest bathing or forest therapy, or it's sometimes called Shinrin-yoku, which is the Japanese term which translates to forest bathing. And it doesn't involve swimming in the woods. It literally just means kind of being out in nature in an intentional way in an effort to heal or to almost like cultivate and invest in your own health, happiness, and well-being. And so there's some kind of emerging research on the benefits of this. And I'll just share some of the big picture highlights. And if you want to go deeper in, you can watch my other video, which I put out on I tried nature meditation, which I share some bullet points from studies. But this one is from Harvard Medical School. Okay. And they summarize some of the research, and they found that forest bathing, okay, so forest therapy or just time in nature, which we'll talk about, has been linked to improved immune function, lower biomarkers of stress. So urinary adrenaline and blood cortisol. Actually, sorry, salivary cortisol, so in your mouth. But what that means is like they'll take people out into the woods or the forest or a green space. They'll take them through some time out there, and then they'll measure in their urine the level of adrenaline. So if you think of like an adrenaline rush, okay, that's kind of like anxiety or nervousness or fear in a lot of cases. And then there's saliva for cortisol, which is often known as the stress hormone. And what they find is that after time in nature, all of those biomarkers of stress and anxiety have decreased. Improved focus and attention, and several other indicators of well-being. The most interesting one, now this is from a different paper published by, the author is Qing Li, Qing space Li, if you want to look it up. One of the things that they highlighted was this forest bathing practice being associated with improved or greater levels of natural killer NK cells, which are cells that kind of their role in the body and immune system is to like hunt and kill off weak, deteriorated, mutated cells. And so they are preventative for cancer. And so even some emerging research that this intentional time set aside in nature, not only is it healing for our kind of mental health and psychology, but even our physical health, like our immune system, our physical biomarkers of stress, and maybe even some preventative effects on cancer as well as heart disease. Okay, so that's the scientific side. The other side of the why is more of like an intuitive element. Imagine the last time you were outside in the forest or in nature or in a lake or in a green space, and maybe you even had some friends around you and you were out there for maybe a couple hours. And maybe on top of this too, you were kind of moving around, exploring. How are you feeling? Probably pretty good, right? I don't know that I've ever asked that question. Someone says, yeah, like spending a couple hours outside in the forest in an intentional way, and I have maybe some friends around me and I'm doing stuff and I feel bad after. Like, it's kind of just obvious in our experience, but it's easy to overlook. And so on both sort of a intuitive experience level and a scientific level, we start to see how this intentional time in nature can have healing and therapeutic effects. And so that's the big why we care about this, of course, as it relates to happiness and health. And so now let's get into how you might approach doing one of these experiences for yourself. This is based on kind of the experience I went through again with Amos Clifford, who founded the Association for Nature and Forest Therapy. You can do this yourself or get some of your friends involved or family or whatever. The only thing to keep in mind is if you go in a group, you're going to want to pay a little bit of attention, especially if you don't know each other well, to like kind of setting up a container and getting to know each other. And maybe even just warning them in advance, like parts of this could be a little weird or feel a little like goofy or foreign or uncomfortable. And it's just like, it's just part of the process. I don't know. It's like dancing at a wedding. Like, it's good for you and fun, but like there's that initial thing of like standing out there awkwardly and like, are we doing this? Are we not? And so just prepare yourself to be able to like find your edge a little bit of like, kind of like that example I gave at the beginning, which I'll talk about why we did that, of like naming this rock or thinking about where does this rock want to guide me? It's not mystical. Right? I'm not saying it's magical. This rock is like talking to me or something. No. But in embracing it in that way and almost that spirit of like childness, maybe I'm able to like connect with my intuition a little differently, or some part of me does feel like, oh, I want to go over in that direction and go to this tree, right? It's just a matter of like shifting our psychological frame and our manner of perception. Okay, that's a thread that we'll talk about in all of this, but it reminds me of the quote from Henry David Thoreau, the famous philosopher and author, who said, I don't know if these are the exact words, but he said basically like, change how you look at things and what you look at will change, okay? To shift the manner in which you actually just perceive your own experience is like the highest of skills. And so here's how you may start this process, okay? If you're an individual, if you're in a group, you'll probably want to just start with hospitality, right? Okay, that's the key, is like getting to know one another. And if you already know one another, that's fine. But just to like get each other going and kind of synced up, here's a potential icebreaker you can use to start, is think of like a place that had special significance for you as a child or young person that had to do with nature. Okay, so maybe an area outside of your house, or a certain tree you used to climb, or a certain spot by the lake that you used to fish, or whatever. Okay, think about that for a little bit. And try to put yourself back in that spot. And as you head down to the forest or the trail or the lake or wherever you're going to kind of go out into nature and do this experience, which you should probably have planned ahead of time, I should add. Try to pick a place that's not super crowded or whatever. But as you kind of head down there, you can talk with one another. Okay, maybe split up in pairs or in groups of 3 and just talk about what that place is and what that experience is. And again, even if you already know each other, this is just a way of being a little bit intentional and starting to create that space, okay, for everyone to go. Now, if you're doing this alone, you can just do the same thing by yourself. As you walk off to your spot, think of a place where you had as a child and just sort of put yourself back in that sort of state of connectedness with nature. Now you walk. Now, this is where you kind of start the process, okay? And there's an element of like ritual here. If you've ever stepped into a church, even if you're not religious, right, it's sort of like you're stepping into a sacred space. And as you step into that sacred space in the outer world, oftentimes it creates a shift in your inner space, that you're stepping into a mindset of a little bit more sacredness or intentionality or depth. Okay, whether it's a temple, a church, a certain spot where you pray, or whatever your thing is, okay? That is kind of how we're thinking about this. So you want to have sort of a threshold experience as you step onto the trail, you cross over that bridge, you get to the edge of the lake, you step into the forest, right? Just whatever that means to you, just almost think of, okay, I'm kind of stepping in, crossing the threshold here, beginning this experience. Now, here's the next phase, is you like walk into the forest for a few minutes and find a spot that feels comfortable. and start to move through your senses. And you can kind of like start to move through your senses. And what this means is you're kind of like do almost like a meditation, but you're trying to sense into each sense. That was well said, Jackson. But here's an example. So you may start with your vision. Okay, so you can continue some walking, or I suggest just stop and find a place that's comfortable. Start with your vision. What do I see? And you can have some prompts, right? Maybe like make a note of these, or you can replay this video when you're out there. Like, what do you see? What colors do you see? What do you see that's moving? What do you see that's hidden? What do you see above you and below you? What don't you see? These are all just prompts to help engage that sensory experience. Then you move to sound. What am I hearing? What am I hearing that's alive? And what am I hearing that's maybe not alive? Okay, so water and wind versus animals. What's the closest thing I can hear and the farthest thing I can hear? The loudest and quietest. Touch. What can I feel? What can I feel in my face in terms of like air or wind? What do my hands feel? You can even pick something up on the ground or a tree and just sense, what is that texture? What am I feeling in my body? Start with the face. What do I feel here? Then you go into taste and smell. What do I smell? Anything good or anything bad? Can I even taste anything in the air? And you just go through this practice for maybe 10 minutes, maybe even up to 15. And as you go through each one, an additional thing that you can start back at the top and go through that can be weirdly powerful or kind of deepening is within each of those senses, find something that's kind of pleasurable and hold on to that and think of like bringing it into your body. And so as you look around, what's something that just seeing it feels pleasant or feels like it gives you some pleasure? And then think of almost taking that feeling into your heart. As you listen, do you hear anything that is pleasurable or pleasant? If you do, think of taking that sound into your heart. Again, this is all metaphorical, by the way, but it has a purpose. As you think of that sense of touch on your face or hands, okay, take that pleasure into your heart. And then if there's anything you can taste or smell, take that into your heart. So that's just a way to start pulling your senses in a therapeutic way into this experience. And it actually reminds me of two things in psychology in the West and yoga in the East. The state in psychology would be absorption or awe, which is when you're kind of just fully immersed in whatever the experience is you're having right now. If you think of like seeing a really good movie where you're just literally like, you're almost in the movie and like 2 hours go by and it's like, what the hell just happened? Okay, that is like a really powerful, beneficial state. And then in the East, it reminds me of samyama, it's called, which is where you're kind of, your sense of self is not separate anymore. You're almost like dissolved into the experience of the present moment. So that's one way to get into that state. Okay. Next, if you're in a group, you can maybe check in and maybe just go around, but like almost like a council and ask a person, like, what was that like? Or what do you notice? No right answers. It's just getting everyone involved and creating that space of like a shared experience. And if you're by yourself, maybe you can still ask that question. Well, what was that like? What do I notice? Next, some slow walking. Okay, so think of just now, it's almost like hiking, but you're almost using the walking as a form of meditation. And again, think of that state of absorption or samyama, where you're sort of walking and just think of opening the senses, feeling each step. If you want to try what's called a fox walk, which again, I did in that video where I talk about trying nature meditation, that is like where you do this barefoot. Okay, you can even do that. But if not, just think of slowly walking, sensing into each step as you move through the forest. And you may do this for even like 30 minutes. Next, as you move through this process, you may want to consider a bit of play. And this is where we start to get into like kind of a little bit finding your edge of your comfort zone, a little bit more out there parts of this experience. So I gave the example of just exploring. Okay, start with exploring. Find a rock, find a branch, find a tree. There's no right way to do this, okay? But it's just finding something and exploring. And like in our example, the experience I did, he said, okay, go find a stone. And so we found a stone. And then it was just exploring. Like, what do you notice? And like what you'll find is kind of weird if you actually just like look at things like this for a while, like there's such a level of like intricacy and complexity that you just don't notice when you just like pick it up and look at it for a second. And so some element of exploration and play, and then you can even try to maybe think almost like a child would. And so some invitations around like I did with this rock. Well, what if you were to name this rock? Like, what would you name it? What would be its story? And if this rock were saying like, oh, I want to go meet another rock, or I want to go look around the forest, like where would this rock want to go? Okay, I'm not very creative. My rock was heavy, so I thought, okay, it just feels like it wants to go straight down. We call that gravity. And so there's really no limit here. Like, this is all about shifting your way of perceiving things, shifting your state of mind to have that more of that almost childlike wonder and sense of play. And this can often be a very therapeutic process. And so, again, just possible invitations you could do are that, like, go find a stone that calls to you and think of like where it came from and who it might be. Go find a tree and just get to know that tree. You can even ask it a question, right? Something that maybe has been bothering you or you've been struggling with, like, you know, what am I supposed to do in my life, or what do I do in this relationship? Okay, you can literally just ask the tree or ask the stone. You can do some sort of art. All right, you might build something. Okay, so you know those little Zen like stacks of stones, or build a little shelter, or create something out of leaves. If you look up a guy, Andy Goldsworthy, he has some really crazy examples of like nature art. And then that would be the final thing, is like ask questions or engage with the other than human world. Not because, again, I don't think there's like a magical law of attraction, mystical thing here, but what you find is oftentimes that engaging in nature in this way, this goes back to, you know, indigenous wisdom and many traditions, even in the East, where you ask questions of nature and sometimes it somehow just pulls this wisdom or insight out of yourself. You know, what do I need right now? What is my way? Look for an answer, as the Bible even said, seek and you shall find, right? And so that may be the final piece of this, is if you've played, you've explored, you did some art, you connected with a tree or some object in nature, is if you have questions or you feel like you need something or you need an answer, ask for it in nature. And again, it's psychology that we're working on here. You may just find that it has a pretty powerful experience on you. I know it did for me when I did this experience. So as you've done this, again, you can bring, if you're out with other people, you can be like, what the hell are we doing? This is super weird. But you might just lean into it. Hey, what's your rock's name? Hey, what's your tree's name? What have you learned from the tree? What was your experience like? Like, just like all this stuff is just, again, changing how you experience your own direct contact with life. So as you wrap that up, this whole thing may have taken you an hour, maybe a couple hours. You can do it in 30 minutes, whatever feels appropriate for you. The final part is to close out that threshold. Remember, we talked about kind of crossing into a sacred space. This is stepping back out of that sacred space, and maybe you even give some gesture of gratitude, whether it's kind of a bow, you maybe kind of give a little tap or a hug to one of the trees. You can find a little object and offer it as a thank you. And again, you're not thanking like the nature, God, pagan spirit or something. Like, you're just thanking the universe. Again, it's symbolic. It's spiritual, not so much literal. And if it feels literal to you, that's totally fine. But again, we're talking here in terms of healing our own psychology and connecting with kind of a deeper sense of connectedness and awe and spirituality. And that's where a lot of this healing comes from, okay? So I'm not trying to be in your face about some weird mystical religion. Now, you may then debrief as well with a counsel, okay? So every person who is with you, no right answers again. Like, what's coming up for you? What was that like? In one word, what would you like to say right now? Okay, and then each person goes around. And if you're with yourself, you may just think to yourself, well, what just happened? Again, no right answer. And so two things that could happen here, right? Is number one is this may just feel good. And we know that there are all these healing benefits of time and nature that I covered in the beginning. And the second is that, again, change how you look at things and what you look at will change. Engaging in this kind of just different way of approaching your own direct experience may change your perspective or consciousness in ways that you don't yet know or don't yet expect. So I encourage you to try it. Okay. So on my channel, as always, I talk about kind of practical tools and experiences from the art and science of happiness. And I hope this thread on nature is helpful to you. And I hope you'll actually try some of this, even if it's like a 20-minute version of this, where you just sacred space, step into nature, go through each of your senses, go for a short walk, find one object and just explore it for 5 minutes and like, the way a child would. You bow, close out your thing, and you're back in 25 minutes. Like, let me know how it is, or try it, and don't let me know how it is, whatever you want to do. But I think it can be really powerful for, again, our physical and mental health, and ultimately our happiness. So this has been part of the Happiness PhD project with Jackson Kirchis. Here's a video that YouTube suggests you'll like. As always, free resources and references are down below. And thanks for watching.